Inside the suite there was no celebration, only terror. "Look at you," Julian sneered, taking another heavy swig directly from the crystal decanter. He stumbled slightly, his tall, broad frame swaying, but his dark eyes remained locked on Dennis with ruthless intent. Hiding behind the velvet couch like a kicked stray. "You think because your father signed those papers you suddenly matter around here?" Dennis pressed his back against the base of the sofa, his breath hitching in ragged, painful gasps. His cheek throbbed where Julian's ringed hand had struck him minutes earlier. His knees were scraped, his hands trembling violently. "Julian, please, you're drunk. Just go back down to the party. We can talk about this tomorrow." Julian let out a booming, cruel laugh that rattled the ice in his glass. "Talk? We don't need to talk, Dennis. You're an Omega. You're here to look pretty, keep your mouth shut, and hand over your family's land rights so Renegade Industries can tear it down for raw materials. That's your sole function." Julian set the decanter down with a hard clack on the marble vanity table and began unbuckling his leather belt. The deliberate, metallic sound made Dennis's stomach turn to ice. He had known Julian was cold, arrogant, and controlling during their arranged courtship, but tonight, fueled by alcohol and absolute power, the mask had slipped entirely. The assault had been swift, brutal, and humiliating, an assertion of ownership before the ink on the contracts was even dry. Dennis's eyes frantically scanned the room for an escape route, but Julian stood squarely between him and the suite's exit. As Julian stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the polished floor, Dennis's hand blindly searched the top of the vanity behind him. His fingers brushed against cold, heavy steel. It was Julian's personal firearm, a custom black oxide semi-automatic pistol he arrogantly carried everywhere, currently resting beside his discarded cufflinks. Without thinking, driven purely by the primal instinct to survive, Dennis grabbed the handle, wrapped his fingers around the grip, and pulled it forward. He raised both shaking hands, pointing the barrel directly at Julian's chest. "Get back," Dennis choked out, his voice cracking. "Don't come near me, Julian. I mean it." Julian paused, but there was no fear in his eyes. Instead, his expression twisted into pure, dark amusement. He took another step forward, closing the distance until the black muzzle of the gun was barely 2 feet from his chest. "What is that supposed to be?" Julian mocked, leaning in close enough that Dennis could smell the sour alcohol on his breath. "You're going to shoot me? You." He spat on the carpet. "Don't make me laugh, Dennis. You've always been weak. A pathetic, soft little Omega who flinches when a door slams too loud. You don't have the guts to pull that trigger." Dennis's knuckles turned white. Tears of anger and humiliation blurred his vision. "Stay back, Julian. You shoot me and you ruin your life," Julian hissed, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You're looking at the future head of Renegade Industries. My family owns the police, the judges, and every news outlet in this state. You shoot your future husband and you spend the rest of your life rotting in a concrete cell. You're nothing without me. You're weak." Julian reached out a large, heavy hand, aiming to snatch the gun out of Dennis's grip while slapping him across the face once more. "Weak." The word echoed in Dennis's mind, cutting through the fear, burning away the despair, leaving behind a white-hot spark of absolute, unadulterated fury. The years of emotional abuse, the forced smiles, the condescending remarks, and the brutal weight of Julian's hands on him just moments ago coalesced into a single fraction of a second. Crack. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed suite. The flash of light illuminated the darkness for a split second. Julian's eyes widened in sheer shock. A choked gasp escaped his lips as the impact forced him backward. Blood instantly began to bloom across the shoulder of his tailored white shirt, dark and thick. He hit the floor hard, gripping his chest, staring up at Dennis in utter disbelief as he let out an agonizing groan. The gun was still smoking in Dennis's hands. The ringing in his ears was absolute. For 3 terrifying seconds, Dennis stood frozen, staring at the pool of blood spreading beneath the man who had tormented him. Panic, raw and overwhelming, crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had just shot the heir to one of the most powerful corporate empires in the nation. Julian's words echoed in his head. Police, judges, concrete cell. No, no, no. Dennis whimpered. Dropping to his knees wouldn't save him. Staying here meant death or life in prison. Driven by blind panic, Dennis kept his white-knuckled grip on the gun, turned and bolted through the suite doors. He slammed into the dimly lit, carpeted hallway of the hotel, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Blood was splattered on his torn shirt, his hair was a disheveled mess, and he was holding a deadly weapon openly in his right hand. He ran blindly down the corridor, tears streaming down his face, his chest heaving as he sought any sign of an emergency exit. He turned a sharp corner near the private elevator bay, sprinting as fast as his trembling legs could carry him, and slammed headfirst into a solid wall of muscle. The impact knocked the breath right out of Dennis's lungs. He stumbled backward, but two firm, heavy hands caught him by the shoulders, locking him in place with terrifying strength. Dennis looked up through a veil of tears, his body paralyzed with fear. Standing before him was a tall, broad-shouldered man in an immaculate, dark three-piece suit. He had a sharp, sculpted jawline, dark hair styled back, and piercing, calculating eyes that immediately dropped to the heavy handgun trembling in Dennis's hand, then up to the blood on Dennis's torn clothes. He looked like an elite bodyguard, or an executioner. "It's over," Dennis thought, his knees giving out entirely as a fresh wave of sob broke from his throat. "I've been caught. My life is over." Chapter 2, Silent Getaway. Dennis's knees buckled under the weight of his terror, but he never hit the carpet. The man's hands gripped his arms with an iron strength, preventing him from collapsing into a heap on the floor. Dennis squeezed his eyes shut, his entire body shaking as he waited for the shouts, the brutal slam of handcuffs against his wrists, or the cold bite of security officers tackling him down. Instead, a calm, low voice cut through the roaring ringing in his ears. "Quiet," the man said. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried an undeniable command, a deep, controlled alpha presence that wasn't aggressive, yet demanded absolute compliance. Before Dennis could wrap his panicked brain around what was happening, the man reached down with lightning speed, wrapped his fingers around the barrel of the handgun, and effortlessly prized it out of Dennis's white-knuckled grip. Dennis let out a choked gasp, expecting the weapon to be turned on him. Instead, the stranger pulled open the inner lining of his tailored suit jacket, slipped the gun into a hidden interior holster, and snapped his coat shut in one fluid, practiced motion. "Get up," the stranger instructed softly, pulling Dennis upward by his wrist. I didn't mean to." Dennis sobbed, his voice cracking into hysterical whispers as tears streamed freely down his cheeks. His vision was blurred, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He hit me, he tried to." "I said quiet," the man repeated, stepping closer. He gripped Dennis's upper arm firmly, squeezing just enough to ground the hyperventilating Omega. "If you want to spend the rest of your life in a supermax facility, keep talking. If you want to live, shut your mouth and walk." Without waiting for an answer, the stranger pivoted, pulling Dennis along behind him. Dennis was too disoriented, too utterly terrified to fight back. He allowed himself to be dragged down the corridor, away from the private suite, toward the far end of the hallway where an unmarked metal door led to the hotel's service stairwell. The heavy door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the faint sound of music floating up from the lower banquet halls. They descended the concrete stairs at a punishing pace. Dennis's legs felt like lead, his bare ankles twisting on the steps as he struggled to keep up with the man's long, confident strides. "Please," Dennis whimpered as they hit the third landing, his chest burning from the effort. "Who are you? Are you taking me to the police?" The man didn't even look back. "Does this feel like the way to the police station?" They burst through the ground floor exit door into a brightly lit service vestibule right near the hotel's rear loading dock. Instantly, two armed hotel security guards stepped out from a monitoring booth, their hands resting on their holstered tasers. Dennis froze, his heart leaping into his throat. "This is it," he thought, terror knotting his stomach. "He's turning me in." "Hold on, sir," the senior guard said, stepping forward with a stern expression. "This area is strictly restricted to hotel staff and—" The guard paused, taking in Dennis's disheveled appearance, the torn silk shirt, and the dried blood on his collar. "Is there a problem here?" Dennis squeezed his eyes shut, preparing his explanation, preparing to surrender. "There's no problem, Sergeant," the man holding Dennis's arm spoke up smoothly. His entire posture shifted in an instant. The tense, dangerous edge vanished, replaced by an air of nonchalant, aristocratic authority. He reached into his breast pocket with his free hand, pulled out a sleek leather wallet, and flashed a silver corporate badge. My personal guest suffered a severe panic attack during the gala upstairs. I'm taking him out through the rear entrance to avoid the press cameras at the front valet. The guard looked at the badge and his eyes widened slightly. Mr. Krios? My apologies, sir. We didn't realize it was you. He looked back at Dennis, whose pale face and shaking frame easily passed for someone having a medical breakdown. Do you need us to call an ambulance? That won't be necessary, Travis Krios replied, his tone polite but final. I have my private medical team waiting outside. Open the gate, please. Right away, sir. The guard immediately swiped his access card against the wall, and the heavy metal rolling gate began to slide upward, revealing the cool night air of the private alleyway. Dennis stared at the man beside him in total, stunned confusion. You lied for me? Why would a stranger lie to security for a murderer? A sleek, black SUV with heavily tinted windows sat idling in the alleyway. The rear door slid open automatically as they approached. Travis pushed Dennis inside first, then climbed in right after him, pulling the door shut with a heavy, airtight thud. Drive, Travis commanded the driver. The vehicle accelerated smoothly into the midnight traffic, leaving the Grand Hyatt far behind. Inside the leather-lined interior of the van, the silence was suffocating. Dennis sat curled in the corner of the seat, hugging his knees to his chest, trembling so violently his teeth chattered. The adrenaline that had carried him out of the hotel was rapidly draining, leaving behind a hollow, agonizing exhaustion. Why? Dennis choked out, staring at the darkened window as the city lights blurred past. Why did you do that? You don't even know me. Travis sat across from him, legs crossed comfortably, watching the Omega with dark, unreadable eyes. He didn't answer right away. He simply reached over to a small minibar, poured a glass of cold water and held it out to Dennis. When Dennis was too paralyzed to take it, Travis set it on the small console beside him. Drink, Travis said softly. Dennis couldn't. His head was spinning. The room, the car, the entire world began to tilt dangerously. The physical trauma of the assault combined with the sheer terror of what he had done finally overwhelmed his system. His vision faded to black around the edges, and before he could ask another question, Dennis slumped sideways against the plush leather seat, losing consciousness entirely. When Dennis opened his eyes, the first thing he felt was the cool, luxurious touch of high thread count silk sheets against his skin. He bolted upright with a sharp gasp, his heart instantly hammering against his ribs. The memory of the gunshot, the blood, and the dark hallway slammed back into his mind with terrifying clarity. He looked down at himself. His torn, blood-stained shirt had been removed, replaced by a soft, clean cotton nightshirt. He was lying in a massive king-sized bed in an impeccably designed, minimalist bedroom. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a sweeping panoramic view of the city skyline at dawn. You slept for nearly 10 hours, a voice spoke up from the corner of the room. Dennis flinched violently, pulling the duvet up to his neck. In the corner, sitting in a leather armchair beside a large television monitor, was Travis. He had shed his suit jacket and rolled his white dress sleeves up to his elbows, revealing strong, muscular forearms. He was holding a remote control, staring at the screen. On the wall-mounted television, a news broadcast was playing on a live loop. The banner at the bottom read, "Renegade heir survives attempted assassination. Fiancé wanted." Dennis's blood ran cold. He stared at the screen in horror. There was Julian, sitting in a hospital bed with a white bandage wrapped tightly around his shoulder, surrounded by microphones and news reporters. His face was pale, but his eyes were filled with practiced, calculated sorrow. "I never expected the man I love to betray me like this," Julian's televised voice echoed through the bedroom, dripping with fabricated grief. "Dennis sneaked into my room, drew a weapon, and shot me in cold blood before stealing critical company documents. He is dangerous, unstable, and currently on the run. I am offering a $2 million reward for any information leading to his arrest." "He's lying," Dennis screamed, his voice cracking as tears burst from his eyes again. He scrambled out of the bed, his feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. "He tried to rape me. He was drunk. I didn't steal anything, I was just trying to protect myself." Travis didn't flinch. He pressed a button on the remote, muting the television, and slowly turned his head to look at Dennis. "I know he's lying," Travis said quietly. Dennis stopped dead in his tracks, wiping his face with the back of his hand. You do." Julian Renegade is an arrogant, abusive sadist, Travis said, his tone icy and precise. He's been playing the public for years, but behind closed doors he's a monster. I know you didn't go in there to assassinate him, Dennis. You don't have the stomach for it. Dennis swallowed hard, his mind racing. He looked at the powerful, dangerous man standing before him in this luxurious penthouse. Relief washed over him, followed immediately by profound confusion. Who are you? Dennis asked, his voice barely a whisper. And why are you helping me? Why risk your life, your reputation, to save a stranger? Dennis took a step closer, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. Did you do it out of chivalry? To save me from him? Travis paused. For a second, a flicker of something soft flashed in his dark eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Suddenly, Travis threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but a rich, amused chuckle that sent a shiver down Dennis's spine. Chivalry? Travis asked, standing up from his chair and walking toward Dennis with slow, deliberate steps until he stood directly in front of the trembling Omega. He towered over Dennis, his presence overwhelming the room. Dennis, let's get one thing straight. I am not a knight in shining armor, and I didn't rescue you out of the goodness of my heart. Travis leaned down, his face inches from Dennis's, his dark eyes locking onto Dennis's wide, terrified gaze. My name is Travis Krios. I am the founder and CEO of Krios International, the primary corporate rival standing between Renegade Industries and complete market dominance, Travis whispered, a cold, sharp smile playing at the corner of his lips. You pulling that trigger last night didn't ruin your life, Dennis. It handed me the ultimate weapon to destroy my enemy. You aren't a victim I saved out of pity. You are a gift from God, wrapped in silk, handed straight to me to take down Julian Renegade once and for all. Chapter 3. Enemy of my enemy. The private elevator opened directly into the high-security subterranean wing of Krios International's headquarters. Dennis stepped out hesitantly, the stark, minimalist architecture of glass, brushed steel and slate-gray stone making him feel painfully small. He wore borrowed clothes, a soft gray cashmere sweater and dark trousers that hung slightly loose on his slender frame, a stark contrast to the immaculate, tailored suit worn by Travis, who strode ahead of him with effortless composure. Keep up, Travis said without looking back, his deep voice cutting through the hum of server racks and low-frequency security equipment. My team doesn't like waiting, and we have a very small window before Julian's legal hounds freeze every account tied to your name. They entered a spacious command center lined with monitors displaying real-time financial tracking, satellite imagery, and news feeds. Standing before a main console was a tall woman with sharp features and hair swept into a tight bun. She turned as they entered, her cold gaze landing on Dennis with immediate scrutiny. This is Vance, my head of security and intelligence operations, Travis introduced, rounding the central table. Vance, this is Dennis. I know who he is, Vance replied flatly, tapping a tablet. He's the most hunted Omega in the state. Renegade Industries has put a $20 million bounty under the guise of a private investigative reward for his capture. Half the dirty cops in the precinct are actively looking for him. She turned her sharp eyes toward Travis. Housing him here is a massive liability to Krios International. Dennis flinched, clutching the hem of his sweater. I can leave, he whispered, the panic rising in his throat once more. I never asked to be brought here. He isn't leaving, Travis cut in sharply, his voice dropping an octave with an immovable aura of authority that made even Vance pause. Dennis is the only eyewitness to Julian Renegade's actual character, and more importantly, he knows the internal layout and access protocols of the Renegade estate. Travis turned to Dennis, his dark eyes locking onto him with intense focus. If you want to survive this, Dennis, you need to stop acting like a victim waiting to be caught. Julian tried to ruin you. Now you help me destroy him. Dennis swallowed hard, his heart pounding against his ribs. The memory of the gun exploding in his hands, the smell of scotch and blood, and Julian's sneering face flashed through his mind. He was terrified, but beneath that terror, a tiny, unfamiliar ember of anger began to burn. What do you need me to do? Dennis asked, his voice trembling but resolute. For the first time since they met, a genuine ghost of a smile flickered across Travis's lips. First, we prove he's lying about the shooting. Vance pulled up the Grand Hyatt security logs on the main screen. The corridor footage outside the private suite for the hour of the incident has been wiped clean, she explained, pointing to a dead stream of static. Julian's men cleared the hotel servers within 30 minutes of the ambulance leaving. However, the hotel uses an offline backup system stored in an isolated server room on the 4th floor. If we get that raw, unedited footage, we have clear video of you fleeing in distress and Julian's security team tampering with the scene. The hotel is currently crawling with renegade guards under the pretext of securing evidence, Travis said, leaning against the console table near Dennis. We move tonight. Vance has secured a safe house near the harbor where we'll stash the drive once we retrieve it. By midnight, the rain was pouring over the docks, hammering relentless sheets against the corrugated metal roof of the safe house, a hidden warehouse leased under a dummy subsidiary of Creos International. Dennis sat on the edge of a crate, holding a warm mug of tea that Travis had handed him 20 minutes earlier. Across the room, Travis was quietly checking the action on a suppressed sidearm, his movements methodical and calm. You don't look like a CO, Dennis murmured softly, breaking the long silence. Travis paused, sliding the magazine back into the grip with a soft click. In this city, being a CEO just means you wear a suit while doing dirty work. If you don't know how to handle a weapon, someone like Julian Renegade will eventually put a bullet in your back. He set the gun down and looked at Dennis. You held your ground last night. Most Omegas in your position would have frozen entirely. I was terrified, Dennis admitted, looking down at his lap. I'm still terrified. Julian was right, he always told me I was weak. I thought if I just did what I was told, if I was a good fiancé, things wouldn't end up like this. Travis walked over, stopping right in front of Dennis. He reached out, his heavy, warm hand gently gripping Dennis's chin, forcing him to tilt his head up. The contact sent a strange electric jolt through Dennis's chest, not of fear but of an overwhelming protective warmth. Julian is a pathetic coward who hides behind his family's money, Travis said softly, his voice surprisingly gentle compared to his usual harsh tone. You aren't weak, Dennis. Weak people don't survive what you survived last night. Don't ever let his words speak for you again. Before Dennis could reply, the heavy metal door at the front of the warehouse caved inward with a deafening crack. Clear the perimeter. Spread out. Rough voices shouted over the roar of the rain. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust in the air. Renegade mercenaries, heavy-set men in tactical gear bearing the red crest of Renegade Industries, poured into the building. Dennis gasped, dropping his mug, which shattered on the concrete floor. They found us. Vance's team was compromised, Travis growled, grabbing Dennis by the arm and hauling him behind a stack of wooden crates just as a hail of suppressed gunfire shredded the air where they had been standing. Splinters rained down on them. Dennis covered his ears, freezing in sheer terror as the booming echoes filled the space. His breathing turned rapid and shallow, the trauma of the previous night threatening to overwhelm his mind completely. Dennis, look at me, Travis commanded, stepping directly in front of him to block him from view, his large frame acting as a physical shield against the incoming fire. He grabbed Dennis by the shoulders, his thumb brushing over Dennis's cheek. Look at me. I will not let them touch you. Do you hear me? Stay low and follow my lead. Travis turned around, his demeanor shifting instantly into that of a lethal apex predator. He leaned around the cover, firing 3 precise shots. 2 mercenaries dropped instantly. Returning fire pinged off the metal crates right above Travis's head, but he didn't even flinch. Moving with terrifying precision and speed, Travis fired, reloaded, and repositioned, staying between Dennis and the advancing men at every second. When one mercenary managed to flank their position, rushing at them with a combat knife, Travis caught the man's wrist, disarmed him in a fluid motion, and drove his elbow into the attacker's throat, neutralizing him instantly. As the last mercenary fell silent, bleeding out on the cold floor, the warehouse fell into a heavy, echoing quiet, broken only by the sound of falling rain. Travis stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving slightly, his suit jacket ruined and his shirt sleeve torn at the shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. He turned back to Dennis, extending a steady, blood-stained hand toward him. Dennis looked at the hand, then up at Travis's dark eyes, filled with fierce, unyielding protection. For the first time, Dennis realized that beneath the cold corporate rival facade, Travis Creos had put his own life directly in the line of fire to keep him safe. Dennis reached out and took his hand. Chapter 4. the corporate heist. The rain had cleared by dawn, leaving the city draped in a heavy, pristine fog. In the secure medical bay beneath Creo's International, Vance pulled a clean bandage tight around Travis's left arm, where the bullet had grazed him during the warehouse ambush. Travis didn't flinch, his eyes fixed entirely on the holographic blueprint projected above the central table. The server wipe at the hotel was just smoke and mirrors, Travis said, his voice low and sharp. Vance dug deeper into Renegade's financial transfers from 3 days before the engagement gala. Julian didn't just snap that night, Dennis. He's been orchestrating this for months. Dennis stepped closer to the projection, his arms folded tightly across his chest. What do you mean? Julian was bleeding cash on offshore currency speculation, Vance explained, tapping the console to bring up a series of encrypted bank ledgers. To cover his losses before the annual board audit, he forged your signature on a series of authorization documents. He set up a shell company in your name and siphoned over $40 million from your family's trust into his failed accounts. He planned to frame you for grand embezzlement all along. The shooting just gave him a convenient excuse to declare you a fugitive and seize control of the assets immediately. Dennis felt the blood drain from his face. The sheer, calculated malice of it made his stomach turn. He didn't just want my family's land, he wanted to completely destroy me so I could never fight back. And to clear your name, we need the master encryption key, Travis said, turning to look Dennis dead in the eye. It's stored on a physical air-gap drive inside the private vault at the Renegade estate. The police won't touch Julian without undeniable proof, and that drive is the only thing that proves the forgery. The estate is a fortress, Vance warned. Since the shooting, Julian has doubled the private security perimeter. Facial recognition cameras, armed patrols, biometric locks. A forced entry is suicide. Dennis stared at the architectural schematic of the mansion, the place where he had spent countless uncomfortable dinners enduring Julian's condescending remarks. His eyes settled on a small service corridor near the western wing. We don't force our way in, Dennis said softly, his voice surprising even himself with its sudden steadiness. All eyes in the room shifted to him. Tonight is the annual Renegade Founders Gala. Julian will be hosting a press photo op in the main ballroom to show the investors he's recovering from the attack. The heavy security will be concentrated on the public entrances and the perimeter fences. Dennis pointed to the rear layout. The Grand Study Vault uses a dual authentication system, a digital passkey and a physical biometric scan. Julian keeps the secondary access panel hidden behind a false mahogany panel near the private library corridor. I know the patrol rotation of the interior staff. I spent 2 years memorizing every corner of that house just to avoid him. Travis watched Dennis carefully, noticing the subtle shift in the Omega's posture. The fearful, trembling boy who had collapsed in the hotel hallway was gone, replaced by someone driven by a quiet, fierce determination. You'd have to come with us inside, Travis noted, a hint of caution in his tone. If Julian catches sight of you. I'm going, Dennis interrupted, looking Travis straight in the eyes without flinching. You took a bullet for me last night, Travis. I'm not sitting in a basement while you risk your life for my freedom. It's my life Julian tried to steal. I'm taking it back. A slow, genuine smirk touched Travis's lips. Then we give the Renegade family a party they'll never forget. At 9 in the evening, the grand estate of the Renegade family blazed with lights and classical music. Dozens of luxury sedans lined the winding driveway as elite guests in formal attire poured through the front doors, greeted by heavily armed private guards in crisp tuxedos. Under the cover of the dense woods bordering the property, a black utility van sat silently. Inside, Dennis smoothed down the front of a black tactical turtleneck, his heart hammering a steady rhythm against his ribs. Beside him, Travis adjusted his earpiece and checked a small, specialized data siphon device. Vance has tapped into the main security grid, Travis said low, leaning close to Dennis. His presence was warm, grounding, and completely reassuring despite the overwhelming danger. She'll blind the cameras in the West Wing for exactly 8 minutes. Once we're inside, we move fast. If anything goes wrong, you fall back to the perimeter while I draw their fire. Understood. No, Dennis replied softly, reaching out to touch Travis's arm. We stick together. We both come out. Travis stared at Dennis for a beat, his dark eyes softening before he gave a firm nod. Together. On Vance's signal, The two slipped through a concealed maintenance gate in the stone wall, keeping to the deep shadows of the manicured gardens. Moving like ghosts, they breached the service entrance Dennis had identified, bypassing the dormant keypad using a bypass chip Vance had prepared. They moved silently down the dimly lit mahogany-paneled corridors of the West Wing. The muffled sound of laughter, clinking champagne glasses, and Julian's loud, boisterous voice echoed faintly from the distant ballroom 3 floors down. Reaching the double doors of Julian's grand study, Travis took up a defensive position near the hallway corner, his hand resting on his hidden sidearm, his sharp eyes sweeping both directions. "You're up." Dennis approached the wall beside the heavy desk. He pressed his hand against the carved wood, feeling for the subtle seam in the mahogany paneling. With a soft click, the panel slid back, revealing a sleek, steel biometric console glowing faint blue. "Biometric scanner," Dennis whispered, his pulse spiking. "It requires a handprint and a primary pin." "Vance gave us a master sequence generator for the pin," Travis said, stepping up behind Dennis, his body heat radiating through Dennis's back like a shield. He attached a small device to the terminal's port, and numbers began rapidly cycling across its digital screen. "That takes care of the code. But the scanner needs a registered physical print." The timer on Travis's wristwatch showed 3 minutes remaining before the camera loop reset. "Julian used to make me set up his private office calendar on his terminal," Dennis recalled rapidly, his mind racing through memories of his miserable months at the estate. He looked down at the sleek glass desk surface, then at the brass paperweight sitting beside the monitor. "He's meticulous, but he's lazy about routine. He uses a secondary override print stored in the local register for emergency house staff access." Dennis reached into his pocket, pulling out a specialized adhesive gel pad Vance had given him. He pressed it firmly against the brass surface of the desk weight where Julian's thumbprints were clearly visible under the room's low light, then pressed the gel pad directly onto the glowing scanner. The console beeped twice. A quiet hydraulic hiss echoed through the room as a wall section behind the bookshelf swung open, revealing a small wall safe. Inside sat a heavy, obsidian black hard drive marked with the internal seal of Renegade Financial. "We got it," Dennis breathed, grabbing the drive. Suddenly, heavy footfalls echoed down the corridor outside. "Check the study," a guard's harsh voice barked from the hallway. The West Wing sensor tripped a power fluctuation. Travis instantly pulled Dennis behind the door, his body pressing Dennis gently against the wall as he drew his weapon with blinding speed. The door handle began to turn. Chapter 5, Line of Fire. The heavy bronze door handle clicked downward. In the suffocating darkness behind the mahogany door, Travis pressed Dennis firmly into the recess of the wall, using his broad shoulders to completely shield him. Dennis held his breath, his knuckles white around the stolen hard drive as the door swung inward. A beam of yellow light cut through the room. A security guard stepped over the threshold, his hand resting on his holstered firearm. Before the guard could scan the dark corner, Travis moved. With terrifying speed and absolute silence, he closed the distance, driving his palm into the guard's sternum and wrenching the weapon from his grip in a single, fluid motion. Before the man could utter a sound, Travis applied a precise sleeper chokehold. Within seconds, the guard went limp and slumped to the carpet. "Out now," Travis whispered, catching the guard's body and lowering it silently. They darted into the dimly lit service corridor, slipping through the manicured garden gate just as the alarm system finally blared across the estate grounds. Red emergency lights bathed the mansion in a crimson glow, but by the time Julian's mercenaries reached the West Wing, Travis and Dennis were already speeding away in the black utility van, lost in the midnight fog. By morning, the rain had returned, drumming a heavy, relentless rhythm against the reinforced glass windows of the Creo's International safe house near the river. Inside, Vance worked frantically at a dual-monitor rig, decrypting the contents of the obsidian hard drive. "It's all here," Vance declared, pointing at cascading lines of bank ledgers and forged digital signatures. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell corporations, and the original unedited transfer logs proving Julian forged Dennis's name 3 weeks before the gala. Coupled with the medical forensic report showing the trajectory of the bullet in Julian's shoulder came from above, proving Dennis was pinned down when he fired, this completely exonerates him. Dennis sat at the central table, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. For the first time in days, the suffocating weight in his chest loosened. "It's over," he murmured softly. We can give this to the federal prosecutors. We give it to them at noon, Travis said, walking into the room carrying 2 warm mugs of coffee. He handed one to Dennis, his dark eyes locking onto him with an expression that was softer than usual. Once the indictment drops, Julian will be arrested without bail. You'll be a free man, Dennis. Dennis looked up, his gaze lingering on Travis's face. And what happens to Creos International? Renegade Industries will suffer a total board collapse, Travis said, sitting on the edge of the table beside him. We'll acquire their distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. The rivalry ends today. He paused, his gaze fixing on Dennis's hands resting on the mug. I told you I did this to destroy my competitor. I got what I wanted. Dennis looked into his coffee, a quiet pang of disappointment twisting in his chest. Right. The corporate war. Vance, contact the federal prosecutor's liaison, Travis commanded, standing up and turning toward the comms unit. Tell them we are bringing the physical drive directly to the federal building. Suddenly the lights in the safe house flickered and died. The hum of the server racks cut out, plunging the room into shadow. Power grid cut. Vance shouted, drawing her sidearm instantly. Sensors show heavy interference on all frequencies. Before she could finish, the reinforced steel door blew inward with a deafening explosion. Smoke and flashbang light filled the room. Dennis gasped, coughing as shockwaves rattled his ribs. Through the blinding haze, heavy tactical boots stormed the facility. Travis fired 3 rapid shots into the smoke, knocking down 2 advancing operatives, but the assault was overwhelming. A concussive blast went off near the console, knocking Vance off her feet. Through the chaos, 2 heavy hands clamped down on Dennis's arms, dragging him backward out of the shattered entrance before he could even scream. Travis? Dennis cried out, struggling frantically against his captors. Dennis? Travis's roar echoed through the smoke, followed by the sound of furious close-quarters combat, and then a sickening, heavy thud. When Dennis regained consciousness, he was tied to a cold metal chair in a cavernous, smelling warehouse by the abandoned industrial docks. Water dripped from the rusted iron rafters, creating a hollow, rhythmic sound. Standing 10 feet away, holding an ice pack to his bandaged shoulder and looking disheveled, was Julian Renegade. His dark eyes burned with manic, unhinged fury. Look at the little fugitive, Julian sneered, stepping closer and slapping Dennis across the face with his free hand. The impact cracked against Dennis's jaw, leaving a stinging welt. Did you really think that bastard Travis Creos could hide you from me? My mole inside Vance's perimeter paid off handsomely. Dennis spat a metallic trace of blood onto the concrete floor, staring up at Julian without a single trace of the fear that used to paralyze him. The evidence is already out, Julian. You're finished? Not yet, Julian growled, pulling a set of legal confession papers and a pen from his coat, setting them on a metal barrel beside Dennis. You're going to sign this full confession stating you shot me in a premeditated attempt to steal my assets. Then you're going to have an accidental overdose in a holding cell. The board will move on and Renegade Industries stays mine. I'll never sign it, Dennis said coldly. Julian dragged a heavy semi-automatic pistol from his belt, chambering a round with a loud, metallic clack. He pressed the cold barrel directly against Dennis's forehead. You don't have a choice, Omega. Sign it, or I end you right here and dump your body in the river. Put the gun down, Julian. A low, lethal voice echoed from the shadowed entrance of the warehouse. Julian spun around, keeping one hand on Dennis's collar. Emerging from the rain outside, completely alone, was Travis. His tailored suit was torn, blood dripped from a cut on his temple, and his hands were raised empty at his sides. Travis? Dennis breathed, his heart leaping into his throat. No, it's a trap. You came alone? Julian laughed hysterically, his grip tightening on Dennis. You stupid bastard. You traded your corporate empire for a pathetic Omega? He isn't a bargaining chip, Travis said steadily, taking slow, deliberate steps forward across the concrete floor. His gaze never left Julian, his voice laced with absolute, terrifying calm. Take the company, Julian. Take the market share. Let him go, and I'll hand over every decrypt key to Creos International's primary reserves right now. Dennis stared at Travis in absolute shock. He's giving up his entire life's work, for me? Julian's eyes narrowed with cruel realization. A mocking smile spread across his face. Well, 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 look at the great Travis Krios. You didn't save him to hurt me, did you? You actually love him. Julian's face twisted into pure malice. Then watch him die. Julian swung the barrel of the gun away from Travis and aimed directly at Dennis's chest, his finger tightening on the trigger. No! Travis roared. Without a second thought for his own life, Travis launched himself forward across the open floor. Bang! The gunshot echoed violently off the corrugated metal walls. Dennis closed his eyes, expecting the searing pain of a bullet. Instead, a heavy warm weight crashed over him, knocking his chair sideways to the floor. Dennis opened his eyes to see Travis lying on top of him, sheltering Dennis's body completely with his own. Travis let out a choked gasp, a dark red stain instantly spreading across the center of his chest. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, dripping onto Dennis's cheek. Travis! Dennis shrieked, tears blinding him as he struggled against his bonds. Travis, look at me. I've got you. Travis rasped, his voice barely a whisper as his hand reached up, his trembling fingers gently brushing against Dennis's face. I've got you. Before Julian could fire a second shot, the corrugated walls of the warehouse collapsed under tactical breaching charges. Flashbangs detonated, and Vance's heavily armed Creo strike team poured into the facility, laying down overwhelming suppressive fire. Julian dropped his weapon, screaming as he was tackled to the ground by 3 operatives. Dennis didn't care about the gunfire or the screaming. He broke his wrists free from the loosened ropes, pulling Travis's heavy, bleeding body into his lap. He pressed both hands desperately against the gaping gunshot wound in Travis's chest, weeping hysterically as dark red blood seeped through his fingers. Stay with me. Please, Travis, stay with me. Dennis sobbed, pressing his forehead against Travis's cold temple. You lied to me, you said I was just a tool, you idiot, you stupid idiot. Travis looked up at him through heavy eyelids, a faint, bloody smile touching his lips. I lied. He whispered, his hand weakly cupping Dennis's cheek before slipping away as his eyes closed. Chapter 6, Checkmate. The emergency room doors burst open, bathed in the flashing crimson lights of arriving police escorts. Paramedics wheeled Travis down the sterile corridor, their hands working frantically to pump oxygen into his lungs and press thick gauze over the blood-soaked bandage on his chest. Dennis ran alongside the gurney, clutching Travis's cold, lifeless hand. Stay with me, Travis. Please keep fighting. Sir, you have to let go. We're moving him to the operating theater, a nurse shouted, gently but firmly pulling Dennis back as the double doors slammed shut. Dennis stood alone in the quiet waiting area, staring at his trembling, blood-stained hands. The metallic scent of Travis's blood clung to his clothes, a stark reminder of the sacrifice he had just witnessed. Travis Krios, the cold, calculating CEO who claimed to care about nothing but corporate dominion, had stepped directly into the path of a bullet to save an Omega the world had deemed disposable. Vance stepped into the waiting room 2 hours later, her arm in a sling and her face covered in soot. She stopped in front of Dennis, her sharp expression softening slightly. The surgeon says the bullet missed his heart by less than an inch. He's out of surgery, but he's in critical condition. They've put him in an induced coma. Dennis let out a long, ragged breath, sliding down the wall until he was sitting on the polished floor. Is Julian in custody? Julian is locked in a high-security holding cell at the central precinct, Vance said, handing Dennis a clean tablet. And thanks to the hard drive we secured before the ambush, federal prosecutors are waiting for your signal. Dennis looked down at the screen, watching the news ticker broadcast live footage of Julian Renegade being dragged in handcuffs through a sea of reporters. The fear that had dictated Dennis's life for years vanished, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. Get me a change of clothes, Dennis said, standing up and wiping his face. And call the federal prosecutor. I'm going to finish this. 3 days later, the glass-walled interrogation room at the Federal Bureau of Investigation headquarters was dead silent. Julian Renegade sat at the center table, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his hands handcuffed to a metal ring embedded in the table. His hair was unkempt, and the arrogant sneer he had worn for years was cracking at the edges. Opposite him sat 2 senior federal prosecutors and Vance. The door clicked open and Dennis walked in. He wore a crisp, dark navy suit, his posture straight, his head held high. He no longer looked like the terrified victim who had fled the Grand Hyatt in torn clothes. Julian glared at him, a flash of pure hatred igniting in his eyes. "You think you've won, Dennis?" Julian spat, his voice rasping through the intercom. "My legal team will have these charges thrown out by sunset. You're still an Omega, and your word means nothing against the renegade family." Dennis didn't respond with anger. He pulled out a chair, sat down smoothly, and placed a thick leather binder on the table. "Your legal team abandoned you 2 hours ago, Julian," Dennis said, his voice dropping into a calm, icy cadence that echoed Travis's own authority. "Because 2 hours ago, the Federal Reserve seized every domestic and offshore account tied to Renegade Industries." Julian's face went pale. "What?" Dennis opened the binder, sliding a series of high-resolution forensic documents across the table. "This is the complete forensic audit of your offshore shell companies, detailing $40 million in illegal embezzlement forged under my name. Beside it is the unedited 4K security footage from the Grand Hyatt, showing your security detail wiping the floor and tampering with evidence before the police arrived." Dennis leaned forward, looking straight into the eyes of the man who had abused him. "And this," Dennis added, sliding a medical report forward, "is the independent forensic analysis of the trajectory of the gunshot wound in your shoulder. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that I fired from a defensive posture while pinned against the floor. You didn't survive an assassination attempt, Julian. You survived a victim defending his life against a violent, drunk rapist." Julian's breath hitched. He looked at the prosecutors, whose faces were completely devoid of sympathy. "This is a setup? Krios framed me. Travis Krios planned this whole thing." "Travis Krios isn't here," Dennis replied coldly, standing up and closing the binder with a sharp thud. "I am. I signed the official federal deposition an hour ago. You are being charged with attempted murder, grand embezzlement, corporate fraud, and human rights violations under federal trafficking laws. You will never set foot inside a renegade office again, and you will spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary." Julian lunged forward, rattling his chains violently as he screamed, "You soft, pathetic little Omega. You're nothing without me." Dennis didn't even flinch as the federal guards wrestled Julian back down into his seat. Dennis turned his back on his former fiancé, walking toward the door without looking back once. That evening, the private room on the top floor of St. Jude Medical Center was quiet, save for the rhythmic, soothing beep of the heart monitor. Dennis sat in a comfortable armchair beside the bed, holding Travis's large, warm hand in his own. The harsh white light of the room reflected off the bouquet of fresh lilies Dennis had placed on the bedside table. The cardiac monitor's rhythm shifted slightly. Dennis looked up instantly. Travis's dark eyelashes fluttered and a low, groggy groan escaped his lips. Slowly, his deep dark eyes opened, unfocusing for a moment before landing squarely on Dennis. "Dennis?" Travis rasped, his voice rough and faint. "Don't try to move," Dennis murmured softly, leaning over to gently touch Travis's cheek, tears of relief shining in his eyes. "You're in the hospital. The surgery was a success." Travis squeezed Dennis's hand weakly, his gaze searching Dennis's face. "Julian, where is?" "Julian is in federal prison without bail," Dennis said with a small, proud smile. "Renegade Industries collapsed this afternoon. Krios International is acquiring their assets as we speak." Travis let out a weak, breathy laugh that made him wince slightly. "So, you cleared your name, and took down my rival for me." "I did," Dennis whispered, leaning down until his forehead rested gently against Travis's shoulder, careful to avoid his bandaged chest. "I told you I was taking my life back." Travis raised his hand with immense effort, his broad fingers threading softly through Dennis's dark hair, holding him close. "You did more than that, Dennis," Travis murmured, his voice filled with an overwhelming rare warmth. "You saved us both." Chapter 7. A New Foundation. 3 weeks later, the morning sun broke over the city, casting a warm, golden radiance across the glass towers of the financial district. On every major news network, the headlines were identical. Renegade Industries files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Krios International acquires majority assets. The corporate empire that had once terrorized the market and held Dennis's family in an iron grip had ceased to exist. Inside the penthouse suite of the Krios estate, the atmosphere was serene. The heavy scent of rain and scotch that had once defined Dennis's life was replaced by the crisp fragrance of fresh eucalyptus and morning coffee. Dennis stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a comfortable cream-colored knit sweater, watching the city below. He held 2 steaming mugs, his posture relaxed, his expression peaceful. Behind him, the soft sound of bare feet on hardwood echoed through the room. Travis stepped up beside him, wearing a loose black shirt left partially unbuttoned, revealing the neat surgical scar over his ribs. Though still recovering, his dark eyes were bright, his presence as commanding and grounded as ever. Dennis turned, handing him one of the mugs with a gentle smile. "You shouldn't be out of bed. Vance said your doctor threatened to put you back on bed rest if you kept reviewing acquisition reports." Travis took a slow sip, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "Vance worries too much. Besides, the renegade acquisition papers were finalized at midnight. I had to sign them personally." He turned his head, his gaze fixing on Dennis with an intensity that made Dennis's heart skip a beat. "Your family's land rights have been fully restored, Dennis. The deeds were transferred back to your father's estate an hour ago." Dennis blinked, shock softening into deep, overwhelming gratitude. "Travis, you didn't have to do that. That land is worth tens of millions." "It belonged to your family before Julian tried to steal it," Travis said steadily, setting his mug down on the glass ledge. "I promised you that you would get your life back. I keep my promises." Dennis looked down at his coffee, tracing the rim of the porcelain cup with his thumb. The quiet between them wasn't cold or awkward. It was filled with an unspoken depth that had grown over weeks of shared danger, quiet hospital nights, and mutual devotion. "You know," Dennis murmured softly, looking back up into Travis's dark eyes, "we never really finished our conversation from the night you brought me here." Travis raised an eyebrow, leaning back against the glass pane. "Which conversation?" "The one where I asked why you saved me," Dennis said, stepping a fraction closer, his voice carrying a subtle, playful challenge. "You told me you weren't a knight in shining armor. You said you didn't care about chivalry, that I was just a gift from God to help you destroy Julian Renegade." Travis let out a low, warm laugh, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I remember." "You lied," Dennis stated simply, a small, knowing smile gracing his lips. "You already had enough leverage to fight Renegade Industries in court. You didn't need to drag a bleeding, terrified Omega down a service stairwell. You didn't need to lie to hotel security, bring me into your home, or risk your life standing in front of Julian's gun at the docks." Dennis set his own mug down and reached out, his fingers gently brushing against the lapel of Travis's shirt, right over his healing chest. "So tell me the truth, Travis. Why did you help me?" Travis went quiet. The formidable corporate titan who had outsmarted entire boards of directors looked at Dennis with an expression of pure, unshielded vulnerability. He reached up, covering Dennis's hand with his own broad, warm palm, pressing Dennis's fingers firmly against his beating heart. "I had been keeping tabs on Julian for months," Travis admitted softly, his deep voice dropping to a tender, quiet murmur. "I knew what kind of monster he was behind closed doors. Every time I saw you at those miserable corporate galas standing beside him with that forced smile, looking like a caged bird, it tore me apart." Travis stepped closer, wrapping his arms around Dennis's waist and pulling him flush against his chest. Dennis rested his hands on Travis's shoulders, looking up at him as Travis continued. "That night at the Grand Hyatt, when you ran out of that hallway with that gun in your hand, you weren't a weak Omega," Travis whispered, his eyes searching Dennis's face with fierce adoration. "You were a survivor. You fought for your life, and when you crashed into me, I knew I would burn my entire company to the ground before I ever let anyone hurt you again. It was never about the business, Dennis. It was always about you." Dennis felt a warm tear escape his eye, but it was a tear of pure relief. He smiled, leaning up on his tiptoes to press his forehead gently against Travis's. "You're terrible at playing the villain, Travis," Dennis murmured softly. "Only for you," Travis replied. Travis tilted Dennis's chin up with his thumb and leaned down, capturing Dennis's lips in a slow, deep kiss. It wasn't born of dominance or desperation, but of profound devotion, trust, and a promise of protection that required no corporate contracts. Dennis wrapped his arms around Travis's neck, melting into the warmth of the embrace, feeling completely safe for the first time in his life. When they finally broke apart, both breathy and smiling, Travis rested his hands on Dennis's hips, looking out at the sprawling city skyline below them. "So what happens now?" Dennis asked quietly, resting his head against Travis's chest, listening to the steady, comforting beat of his heart. "The trial is over, Renegade is gone, and I'm a free man. Now," Travis said softly, kissing the top of Dennis's head as the morning sun flooded the penthouse with light, "we build something new. Together."